Imagine a country that seems to have cheated history. While the rest of the world suffered through the 2008 financial crisis, this country did not. It didn't have a recession. It didn't have a banking collapse. For 30 years, an entire human generation, it held the world record for the longest streak of uninterrupted economic growth in modern history. If you look at it from the outside, it looks like paradise. It has the best beaches on earth. It has cities like Melbourne and Sydney that are cleaner, safer, and warmer than anything in North America or Europe. It has the highest median wealth per adult in the world. It is called the lucky country, Australia. But there is a dark irony to that nickname that most people, even Australians, have forgotten. When the author Donald Horne coined that phrase in the 1960s, he wasn't paying Australia a compliment. He was insulting it. He wrote, "Australia is a lucky country run mainly by second-rate people who share its luck." He meant that Australia wasn't rich because it was smart or innovative or hardworking. It was rich because it was geologically blessed and geographically isolated. It was rich because it was dumb and lucky. And now in 2025, the luck is running out. If you are a young Australian today, sitting in a cafe in Surrey Hills or Fitzroy, sipping a $7 flat white, you can feel the ground shifting beneath your feet. You know that the wealth the statistics talk about doesn't belong to you. It belongs to your parents. It belongs to the mining companies. It belongs to the banks. You are living in the twin brother of Canada. You have the same housing bubble, the same oligopolies, the same immigration trap. But you have something else. You have a unique, terrifying dependency on a single foreign power, and a tax system that has turned your entire nation into a giant real estate casino disguised as a democracy. Today, we are going to perform an autopsy on the Australian miracle. We are going to look at the quarry with a cafe attached. We are going to explain negative gearing, the specific policy that ate the Australian dream. We are going to look at the end of the China boom, and we are going to answer the question, what happens to the lucky country when the luck finally runs dry? This is the story of a paradise built on a fault line. To understand the Australian economy, you have to understand that it is not really an economy in the traditional sense. It is a hole in the ground. If you strip away the cafes, the universities, the banks, and the construction sites, what you're left with is a mine. Australia is the world's largest exporter of iron ore. It is a titan of coal, gold, and gas. For the last 20 years, Australia has been fed a steady diet of cash by the industrialization of China. Every time a skyscraper went up in Shanghai, an Australian got paid. Every time a bridge was built in Shenzhen, the Australian dollar got stronger. This created a gold rush mentality that infected the entire culture. It convinced this political class that they were geniuses. They looked at the budget surpluses and the growing GDP and said, look at our superior economic management. But it wasn't management. It was geology. This massive influx of easy money caused a classic case of Dutch disease, similar to what we saw in Canada, but more extreme. The mining boom sucked all the oxygen out of the room. It drove up the currency, which killed the manufacturing sector. Australia used to make cars, the Holden and the Ford. Now, they make nothing. The complexity of the Australian economy has collapsed. The Harvard Atlas of Economic Complexity ranks nations by the diversity and sophistication of what they export. Japan is number 1. Germany is number 3. Australia, it ranks 93rd. It is ranked below Uganda, below Vietnam, below Senegal. Think about that. A G20 nation, a first world powerhouse, has an export profile that looks like a developing colony from the 19th century. We dig dirt, we put it on a ship, and we buy back the finished products. This worked fine when China was growing at 10% a year. But the China century is slowing down. The Chinese real estate market has imploded. Their demand for steel is plateauing. Australia has bet its entire national livelihood on a single client, and that client is currently having a heart attack. But the Australian people didn't feel this hollowness directly. They felt rich. Why? Because the mining money didn't just sit in the ground. It flowed into the banking system, and then it flowed into the favorite national pastime, property. If you thought the Canadian housing market was a Ponzi scheme, wait until you see Australia. In Canada, housing is an obsession. In Australia, it is a blood sport. It is a national religion. It is the only topic of conversation at every barbecue from Perth to Brisbane. But there's a specific mechanism in Australia that makes it unique, a mechanism that acts as an accelerant on the fire. It is called negative gearing. In most countries, if you buy an investment property and the rent doesn't cover the mortgage interest, you make a loss. That's bad business. You might be able to deduct that loss against future property profits, but that's it. In Australia, the government allows you to take that loss and deduct it against your regular income. Let me explain what this does to the psychology of a nation. Imagine you are a dentist in Sydney. You earn $200,000 a year. You pay a lot of tax. You want to pay less tax. So you go to the bank. You borrow $1 million to buy a shack in the suburbs. The rent is low. The mortgage is high. You lose $20,000 a year on the house. In a normal country, you are a bad investor. In Australia, you are a genius because the government lets you deduct that $20,000 from your dentist's salary. You lower your tax bill. The government is effectively subsidizing you to speculate on housing. You don't care about the rent. You don't care about the yield. You only care about capital gains. You are betting that the price will go up forever. This policy turned every high-income earner in the country into a property speculator. It unleashed a wall of money into the housing market that had nothing to do with people needing a place to live and everything to do with tax minimization. The result? The Australian dream of a quarter-acre block with a Hills Hoist clothesline in the backyard is dead. It has been subdivided, developed, and sold to an investor who is using it as a tax write-off. Australian household debt is among the highest in the world, regularly trading the number 1 or 2 spot with Switzerland and, you guessed it, Canada. But the cultural impact is even deeper than the financial one. It created a class divide that is tearing the fair go apart. The fair go. That is the Australian motto. It means everyone deserves a shot. It is the egalitarian spirit that says the boss and the worker are mates. But negative gearing destroyed the fair go. It created a landed gentry. If you own property, the tax system works for you. The banking system works for you. The government, terrified of crashing the market, works for you. If you don't own property, you are paying rent to the dentist who is using your home to lower his tax bill. You are essentially paying for his retirement while you can't afford your own. And just like in Canada, the young are realizing the game is rigged. But in Australia, the visual contrast is even more painful. In Canada, the housing crisis is cold. It's dark basements in winter. In Australia, the housing crisis is sunny. It's beautiful. You can walk along Bondi Beach. You can see the multi-million-dollar villas on the cliffs. You can see the lifestyle you were promised. It is right there. It is tactile, but you can't touch it. You are the generation rent. You are living in share houses well into your 30s, dealing with inspections where strangers judge how clean your bedroom is, terrified that the landlord will raise the rent by $100 a week because the market says so. And to keep this machine running, to keep the prices going up even as productivity flatlines, Australia pulled the same lever as Canada, the Big Australia policy. This is the Australian version of the population trap. For the last 20 years, Australia has run one of the highest immigration programs in the developed world. They call it Big Australia. The logic is the same: import people to boost the headline GDP numbers so we don't have a technical recession. If you add 500,000 people to a country of 26 million in a single year, the economy has to grow. There is more consumption. There are more bodies. But just like its twin brother in the north, Australia forgot to build the infrastructure. If you live in Sydney or Melbourne, you feel this every day. The toll roads are clogged, the trains are packed. The hospitals are on code yellow or code red constantly. This is what economists call capital shallowing. It means we are spreading the same amount of butter over a much larger piece of toast. The per capita recession in Australia is real. People are getting poorer. Real wages have collapsed back to levels seen in 2009. 15 years of wage growth, wiped out by inflation and population shock. But unlike Canada, Australia has a hidden buffer. A secret weapon that has kept the revolution at bay. We need to talk about superannuation. This is the biggest difference between the twins. This is why Australia feels slightly richer, slightly more resilient than Canada. In the early 1990s, the Australian government made a decision that changed history. They looked at the demographics. They saw the aging population coming, and they realized they couldn't afford a generous state pension system. So they forced everyone to save. Superannuation, or super, is a mandatory retirement savings scheme. Every employer must put a percentage of your wage, currently drifting up to 12%, into a private investment fund. You cannot touch it until you retire. This sounds boring, but the result is staggering. Australia, a country of only 26 million people, now has the 4th largest pool of pension assets in the world, almost $3.5 trillion. This is a monster pool of capital. It is a sovereign wealth fund that belongs to the people, not the state. This money has to go somewhere. It flows into the Australian Stock Exchange, the ASX. It flows into corporate bonds, and increasingly, it flows into infrastructure. When you drive on a toll road in Sydney or fly out of an airport in Brisbane, chances are that infrastructure is owned by the workers' super funds. This creates a wealth effect. Even if an Australian isn't earning a high wage, they see their super balance growing. They feel like an investor. They feel a stake in the system. It acts as a massive shock absorber. During the 2008 crisis and the 2020 pandemic, this wall of capital stabilized the markets. It prevented the total collapse of confidence. But there is a dark side to superannuation too. It creates a fee factory. The financial industry in Australia extracts billions of dollars in fees from these funds every year. It is a gravy train for the suits in Sydney's CBD. And more importantly, it creates a moral hazard. Because everyone's retirement is tied to the stock market and the banks, which make up a huge chunk of the ASX, the government cannot let the banks fail. They cannot let the big miners fail. If the ASX crashes, the nation's retirement vanishes. So, the government protects the oligopolies. Just like Canada, Australia is a land of duopolies and oligopolies. You buy groceries? You have two choices, Coles or Woolworths. Together, they control 2/3 of the market. They have been accused of price gouging during the inflation crisis, posting record profits while families struggle to put food on the table. You want to fly? You fly Qantas. It is the spirit of Australia. But it is also a ruthless corporate entity that dominates the skies, protected from foreign competition by government regulation. You want a bank account? You go to the Big Four. This lack of competition is the Australia tax. You pay more for everything. The cost of living crisis is exacerbated by corporate concentration. So you have the miner digging the hole, the government importing the people, the bank lending the money, and the super fund buying the shares. It is a closed loop, a perfect circle of enrichment for the elite and a treadmill for the worker. But the scariest part of the Australian story isn't domestic. It's geopolitical. Australia is a Western nation located in the East. Strategically, it relies on the United States for security. Economically, it relies on China for survival. For 30 years, Australia managed to walk this tightrope. They sold iron to China and bought fighter jets from America. They said, we don't have to choose. But the world is changing. The tightrope is snapping. As tensions rise between the US and China, Australia is on the front line. China has already shown it is willing to weaponize trade. In 2020, after Australia called for an inquiry into the origins of COVID, China slapped tariffs on Australian barley, wine, and coal. It was a warning shot. Nice economy you have there. It would be a shame if someone stopped buying your rocks. If China ever decided to stop buying Australian iron ore, or if the Chinese economy simply collapses due to its own debt crisis, the Australian dollar would implode. The government revenue would vanish. The surplus would turn into a catastrophic deficit. The lucky country is living with a gun to its head, and the finger on the trigger is in Beijing. And what about the environment? We cannot talk about Australia without talking about the climate. Australia is the canary in the coal mine for climate change. It is a continent of fire and flood. We saw it in the black summer of 2019. The country was on fire. The smoke was so thick it circled the globe. Yet Australia is one of the world's largest exporters of fossil fuels. Coal and gas are the lifeblood of the economy. This is the existential trap. The thing that makes Australia rich, selling carbon, is the thing that is making the continent uninhabitable. The insurance companies are starting to do the math. In some parts of Australia, you cannot get flood insurance anymore, or if you can, it costs $30,000 a year. When a property becomes uninsurable, its value goes to zero. We are seeing the early stages of a climate correction in the real estate market. The beautiful house by the river isn't an asset, it's a liability, but the market hasn't fully priced this in yet. It is denial on a massive scale. So let's bring it back to the person sitting in that cafe, the young Australian. They are looking at a country that feels like a VIP lounge that is closing down. They see a university system that has become a visa factory for international students, creating degrees that are worth less and less. They see a rental market that is a Hunger Games. They see a political class that is obsessed with culture wars while the economic foundation rots. And they see the tall poppy syndrome shifting. Traditionally, Australians hated inequality. If someone got too rich or too arrogant, you cut them down. You cut the tall poppy. But now, the poppies are so tall, you can't reach them. The inequality is entrenched. Australia is becoming a cleaner, sunnier version of feudalism. So, is it over? Is the luck gone? Not necessarily. Australia has advantages that Canada does not. It has the sun. It has the potential to be a renewable energy superpower. It could export hydrogen or sunshine via undersea cables to Asia. It has the minerals, lithium, copper, needed for the green transition. It has the superannuation capital. If that money was directed into venture capital, into manufacturing, into solving the housing crisis, instead of just pumping up bank stocks, it could transform the nation. But that requires a change in mindset. It requires stopping the dig it up and ship it out mentality. It requires breaking the addiction to the housing casino. It requires the lucky country to stop relying on lucks and start relying on brains. Until that happens, the young Australian faces a choice. Do you stay and fight for a slice of a shrinking pie? Do you move to the regions and hope for a quieter life? Or do you join the growing diaspora of Aussies in London and New York, looking for dynamism in the old world because the new world has become stagnant? The sun is still shining in Sydney. The beaches are still beautiful. The coffee is still the best in the world, but the shadow is lengthening. The party that started in 1991 is officially over. The lights are coming on. The music has stopped. And Australia is looking at the bill, realizing it put everything on the credit card of a future that has just been cancelled. The twin brother in the north, Canada, has already fallen ill. The twin brother in the south is showing the same symptoms. The question is, will Australia take the medicine, or will it keep doubling down on the bet until the casino closes its doors?